2018. I call this meeting to order and again ask the clerk to call the roll.
Trustee Kammer?
Here.
Carbonaro?
Here.
Daney?
Here.
GABRENYA?
Here.
Hopkins?
Here.
Rinke?
Here.
President Wallace.
Still here. First item we have in our committee meeting this evening is under Committee on Economic Development, Chairman GABRENYA.
Thank you, Mr. President. Several months ago, we discussed the possibility of working towards a proposal for the parcel owned by the village on Railroad Avenue. We have a bid for that, and I would defer to you, Tony, if I may.
Thank you, Chairman GABRENYA and Committee of the Whole. As she stated, this is a result of the downtown TOD plan that was formally adopted by the village board 18 months ago, back in October of 2016. As a component of this plan, the consultants and those who worked on the plan identified several key parcels in the downtown area where new residential development could be located, including a 1.87 acre parcel at the southwest corner of East Railroad Avenue and Berteau, owned by the village of Bartlett. This is basically the undeveloped eastern portion of the Bartlett Town Center condominium development. So it's known as Site E. Within the plan, it was categorized as a near-term development site, meaning that it should be ready for development within the next 1 to 3 years. And here we are smack dab in the middle of the 1 to 3 years. The site was originally approved back in September of 2003 by the village board, as I mentioned, as part of the town center plan unit development for originally planned for two 24-unit condominium buildings. And then a couple years after that, it was amended by the would-be developer at the time, New England Builders, to construct two 27-unit buildings. So many years ago, it was approved for a total of 54 units within two buildings. SCB's report that was adopted as the TOD plan noted that due to changing demand, a rental apartment development is more feasible than condominium buildings on this site today, and that it's a very attractive site because it's vacant, cleared, and obviously within close proximity to the village's metro station. Thanks, Jim. With this in mind, village staff brought before you back about 4 months ago in December proposed request for proposals document that we worked on crafting along with the village attorney, Brian Mraz. It was presented to the Committee of the Whole back on December 5th, 2017, at which time you folks gave us the go-ahead to go ahead and issue that request for proposals. It was actually a solicitation of bids document as well as a request for proposals. The village sent that along, it posted on the village website, as well as sending it to numerous developers who had recent successful experience in transit-oriented development projects in area communities. So following about a 2-month period, little over 2 months of fielding questions and sending this out, and the due date was in mid-February, and Foxford Communities, who is an active developer of apartment projects in many area communities, including but not limited to Lake Zurich, Oswego, Hawthorne Woods, Countryside, Lake Bluff, Barrington, Glenview, and several others, submitted the loan bid for this property, as well as all the required documents as we had set out. Foxford proposes, as you see there in color before you, a 254-foot by 77-foot building. This would be comprised of 41 rental apartment units, 21 of them being 2-bedroom units, and 20 of them being 1-bedroom units. The proposed rental rates for these units would be in the $1,500 and up range for the 1-bedroom units, and the 2-bedroom units would be planned at $1,900 and above. A very interesting and dare say, creative architectural aspect of this proposal is that the front elevation of the building, as you can see, is made to look, designed to appear to be 9 row houses rather than what you typically see in a typical traditional apartment building. Foxford has designed the building in this manner in an effort to fit in architecturally, as we had stipulated in the request for proposals document that we were seeking, something complementary to the existing architecture of both the Bartlett Town Center condominiums to the west of the property, as well as the Asbury Place Townhome development to its east. Foxford Communities proposes to close on this property above the minimum required bidding price, which the village attorney had set at $660,000. We came to that amount because that is 80% of the appraised value of the property. So their bid came in at $662,500. Also, they had requested a closing credit of $8,000 in lieu of the village providing an ALTA survey. I'd like to note that as part of the proposal, they submitted their financials in sealed envelopes that Village Attorney Mraz is in possession of. Also, I might add that they would be required to pay for all building permit fees and review fees. This is a fairly large-scale project as these things go. They propose a $6.8 million budget for this project. So taking into account, with the original document that we put before you in December, we had proposed bringing this before the Economic Development Commission for their review and input. We had been anticipating multiple submittals at that time. And because taking into account that we have this one submittal, and it's a strong one, and meets all the requirements that we had asked them to submit, staff is requesting that this be forwarded straight from the committee of the whole to an upcoming board meeting agenda. Foxford's estimated timetable, team experience, building elevations, and all the items requested of the request for proposals were attached for your review. And in the audience tonight is the representative of Foxford Communities, Tim Kellogg, who we communicated with throughout this process, replying to various questions and discussing the requirements for the submittal with him. So for any particulars on Foxford's experience or particular details of this project, I would defer to Tim Kellogg.
So there's 6 units per building? Are there
Yeah,
some-
this is actually one building designed with the 41 units. So it's really the facade, by my understanding, the facade is designed. It's not all separate buildings. Some of the apartments may span various buildings, but that's really the facade feature of the proposal.
Total number of units is how much?
It's 41. Let me go back and stipulate. It was 41 units. 21 of them would be 2-bedroom units, and 20 of them would be 1-bedroom units.
Okay, and how many parking spots were in the picture, the previous picture?
Their parking, I believe, I know I reviewed it with Roberta Grill, and it met the minimum code. I'm flipping through it now to look for the number. 71 parking spaces, about 1.73 per unit.
Thank you.
I don't know if you could answer this, but what is the timeline as far as construction, build out?
They want to move straight ahead with this. If the board chooses to enter into this, they've submitted a timeline as part of their proposal, and they would have to go through the formal approval process.
Right, through the village, but I mean, once construction starts.
I'm going to defer to Tim Kellogg on this.
Good evening. As Tony mentioned, my name is Tim Kellogg. Really happy to be here representing Foxford Communities. Our estimated project timeline actually is within our submittal also, going through all the different timeframes. Once we were to close on the project, we would think that it'd take about 2 months to get the site conditions and site groundbreaking work done, and then approximately about 12 months from beginning to end once we started going vertical with it, obviously weather being a factor.
You'll be renting this time next year.
Well, it's after they go through
It
the,
would end up just, yeah, it'd take a little while longer to get through the process to get to the point of groundbreaking, but sooner the better for us.
the way we set up the RFP was that that it be contingent on zoning. And so they would go submit their plans in greater detail. And they have to amend the PUD that exists there and some other zoning requirements. And you'll see this again through that process. If you didn't approve of the zoning after all that, then they could walk. And they wouldn't go through with the transaction. But they're not going to close on it, pay us the money, and then risk that we would turn down the proposed project. So that was all contemplated as part of the RFP. And as you may recall, it was a hybrid of different statutes so that we had a minimum price and built in what the market builds in for these type of this size development where they buy land contingent on getting all their zoning approvals and other approvals necessary to build it.
Good.
Once that happens, then that time frame that he mentioned will kick in,
Yep, thank you.
and we would close.
Well, as this moves along, will this be required to go through a public hearing?
Yes.
Tony, go ahead. I have two questions. One, and we may have discussed before, but apartments versus condominiums, can you define why the PUD, why the TOD had stipulated that apartments would be better in that location than condos? And then my second question is, did it surprise or concern you that this submission is very well put together, and that is appreciated? But did it surprise you there was only one? And does that concern the staff at all, that there's only one bid?
Well, that's an easier question, so I'll answer that first. It was a little bit surprising that there was only one because there were a number of other parties that had been inquiring and investigating that site as well. And we had thought there would be 2 or possibly 3 submittals just by the calls that we were getting. They gave various reasons for not submitting. Truthfully, one of them because of the asking price of it, and also lack of TIF incentives on the site. So it was I'm going to answer that yes, we were surprised somewhat that there was only the one submittal.
Does it concern staff that there is only one?
I mean, myself, not personally, because we got such a strong submittal.
Okay.
If we had no submittals or one submittal but a weaker submittal, that would be certainly cause for concern. The more complicated question of apartments versus condominiums, there's a number of reasons. The largest one most likely just being general market forces of a lack of new condominium developments throughout suburban downtowns over the past several years. I would estimate that the last 20-plus calls that I've had and other staff has had on these types of projects have all been apartments, and none of them have been condominiums. It's been happening throughout the suburban market as well. That's kind of more of a macro reason, and more of a Bartlett-only reason is due to this type of product in our market. There are a couple of apartment complexes in the community, but they're of older vintage, and some of them lack the modern amenities that a more high-end, newer project like this would have. So in terms of the type of housing for double income, no kids, or empty nesters, or for whatever reason somebody wants to rent an apartment, perhaps not being tied to a mortgage or a property that might be difficult to sell for whatever reason, there is this type of demand in the Bartlett market. The TOD plan was very specific, identifying kind of a market gap in apartment developments with more modern amenities here in our market.
Thank you.
Tony, when we were putting this out and we were deciding to let this be something we could have people bid on it, I specifically asked that we go to the condominium associations at the Bartlett Town Center and get feedback and information from them. So the first question is, was that ever followed through on? And then the second question is, what kind of feedback did we receive from the condominium associations at the Bartlett Town Center?
I will tell you that we've heard from some of the condominium owners who were concerned about what the rental price point would be on the apartments, but they felt that it was commensurate with what is also being rented in the condominiums.
Okay.
They were more comfortable once they saw the price point.
Had no concern about traffic pattern and cars coming in and outdoor parking and that sort of thing?
I can only speak to the comments that we got, but I would think maybe, we may get some of those once we see the actual development move through the development process. But initially, there was some concern of it being apartments, and then the price point made the difference.
Well, but the price points, not to argue against that, but market conditions being what they are, if you can't lease it out at the price point, the published price point, then theoretically you drop your price point.
I would just say that the comments that I heard was the condos that are being marketed for rent in town center have similar rents. And since I'm in the housing market, as you all know, I can vouch for that.
And I would say that any developer is going to be relying primarily on his return on asset, and that's all figured out well before you start slipping those price points, and they won't be building.
One of the perennial concerns I have is parking, and I know it's kind of early because this hasn't even reached the site plan approval stage. But once something like this is built, it's very expensive and very difficult to add any additional parking. So I want to say up front, and I want to make sure there's enough parking here, because I think the success of a project like this in Bartlett is going to rise or fall on parking. If there are parking issues, people don't have the patience for that. If there's spillover parking in adjacent developments, people are going to be unhappy about that. So I think it's really important that we have enough parking.
I agree.
It's a good point moving forward.
Does bringing in an apartment building, so those owners that purchased in the town center, especially those who had them a long time, were sold on the fact it was going to be a 3-building four building, a multiple building development, and this final building didn't come to fruition. So in bringing an apartment building, does that change their property values at all? Does it affect, do we as a board need to be cognizant of that?
I mean, there isn't, that's not part of the submittal at this point, is to try to determine what effect it might have on property values. In terms of, we've looked at it in terms of the architecture of the site, the number of units, the way it fits in with the existing buildings in the area to make sure it's not greatly at odds with them or sticking out like a sore thumb or something of that nature. So as Administrator Schumacher said, with the higher price points and with similar rental rates that the rental units have in Bartlett Town Center, we're not anticipating it to have a negative effect on the downtown. Actually hoping for the opposite effect, to bring a little, some new construction, some new projects, some new customers for local businesses as well. And because of the transit-oriented nature of it, we're actually hoping some percentage of them are people who use the Metro station to commute downtown. So we're thinking it's going to be more of a plus for the downtown area than a detractor.
But ultimately, we don't have any control over those price points. That's simply the builder's choice to put the rent and whatever desired figure that he chooses to bring out, correct?
Correct.
So, obviously, we're not anticipating it's going to be something that they're going to build and it's going to be low-income housing, but that's certainly something we wouldn't want, right?
Correct.
I think the $8,000 for the Alta is maybe a little bit heavy, but considering that the developer's proposing to pay the freight on the review fees and the connection fees and all that other stuff, it seems relatively reasonable.
So our next steps will be to bring this to the board for your approval and then move it on toward the traditional development process through site plan and all that good stuff.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman GABRENYA. Next item we have in our committee this evening is Building and Zoning. Chairman Hopkins.
Thank you, President Wallace. We have two things on our agenda tonight. The first is the discussion of chickens in residential districts. I know I brought this up under new business to try to revisit this. So I don't know if Jim wants to kind of go through this a little bit.
I will be glad to. We last talked about this in January. The January was, as you brought it up, Trustee Hopkins, and under new business, there was a discussion because one of the chicken license applicants did not meet the minimum square foot lot size of 8,000 square foot, and there's no variance process involved in it. At that time, I think the consensus was to move it on because the year anniversary of the first chicken license hadn't been achieved yet. Today is that great anniversary, and we have the people who are our first chicken license, Jennifer and her husband.
And not to balk at the chicken license.
They look
but
very
I did
clean.
ask staff to put this off a little bit until we're done with budget, so. Thank you.
So we're here tonight with that same discussion. We put up a map of the 4 licenses that we have issued. The original discussion was to issue a maximum of 25 within the first year. Obviously, we didn't get there. We got 4 licenses. They're healthy, thriving chickens from what I am told. And there's our license for the first license that we issued to Jennifer and her husband. And if you, that's all I have. So we can go on with the discussion.
You know, let me ask you, I probably have to ask Mr. Mraz this, and it's been explained to me before.
He doesn't have any chickens.
It's been explained to me before, but sometimes people have to tell me this more than once. Why isn't there a variance process in this? I remember when we first did this, we said it'd be 8,000 square foot lots, and I raised the question if somebody were in a situation like this, that they could maybe go before the ZBA, and I was told, no, that's not the case, and I'm not clear. So
Okay.
if you could please.
We did not include a variation process. Trustee Hopkins raised the issue as well after there was someone who was, 100 square feet short of that. Even with a variation process, there's still a line, there's still a maximum variation. And then you have to get into what the standards for variation are. It can't just be ad hoc. So our variation standards now that we have for zoning variations really did not apply. They were, you could finagle them a little to try and say that those were the standards. It could be amended to provide some variation, but process. But, what is that? 10%? There's still, it can't just be totally open-ended. So, and there will be somebody who will be just beyond that line. So, you know, it'll be the next guy who is 11%. And I don't know if that's rear yards, side yards, you know, so we would have to, you'd have to tell us where you would be comfortable. It may just be square footage of the yard. It's really a function of how close the chickens are to the neighbors. There's probably a point at which, or there obviously was when we picked the size lot that you picked, that we didn't think it was appropriate in multifamily areas or areas with smaller homes, less room for the chickens to roam, et cetera. So that was the line that was picked. And there was not a process, you know, built into that original ordinance. And it became an issue when a couple people who were interested were just below the threshold that the board set. We wanted to sit back and see what the demand was and, you know, what the impact was. And I don't think there's a lot of licenses with 4 to get perhaps a real feeling of the impact on neighbors, but nor the demand that may have been anticipated. But if the board wishes to modify the ordinance to add a variation process, we can do that. But I need a little direction if that's what the board wishes to do.
Well, let me ask you this. If we did say, well, let me, Jim, the demand for this, if we've been pretty steady on the 4 permits and the one that doesn't qualify, have you seen more?
We've had other inquiries. We had people come in and ask about applying this year. So far, we have not received any more, but there's probably people who are anticipating applying.
Do you know if those people would have qualified with the 8,000 square feet?
I believe, yes. The one lady,
All right, so
the couple people we talked to all had
the
that.
exception. They would have. All right, now my question is, if we did have let's say hypothetically we did take 10%, and then we structured it in a manner that the ZBA would have an opportunity of looking at this, and if there were situations with the side yard, or if there were situations where with a setback, whatever the case may be, that they could still at that point in time say, I'm sorry, but we don't approve your request, even though there is a variance of hypothetically.
That's why you have to say what those standards are for granting, or the findings have to be for variance. They just don't fit well for this use, but I think they could be used.
I think the variance process is very typical and common in construction and building and things like that. This particular instance, I think we're better off just allowing people in residential zoning districts to have chickens as long as they meet the requirements of the setbacks. They have the area for the run and the coop, and I think that is restriction enough. And if you have the requirements and you meet all those, you should be allowed to have chickens. I think 8,000 feet is just an arbitrary number that doesn't really mean anything, actually, because you allow people to have cats and dogs, and they don't even have yards.
I would tend to agree with Trustee Hopkins on that. And I would ask Jim, what is our smallest, what do the lot sizes go down to? 6,000 square feet? I mean,
Our smallest single-family lot size is 6,000.
6,000 square feet. So we've had 4 applications, 4 permits. We're not busting down the doors. We've had no complaints as far as I know, correct?
Correct.
So I would think, you know, that's just kind of what I thought when it first brought it up, was that it was going to be a moot issue, that, you know, people would be happy to have them, but it wouldn't be, you know, life-changing to the town. And so I agree. If we have smaller lots and they meet their setbacks, then what damage would be done? And plus, it would actually, in the end, be less work for staff.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there ought to be some kind of variance process worked into this. a simplified variance process. And I've shared with you, there's a lady in my neighborhood, her home, I think is, the lot is slightly less than 8,000 square feet, but her house backs to the Route 59 sound wall. Clucking chickens are not going to be a noise issue at that location. She should get a residential chicken license. So things like surveys, site plans, landscaping plans, they're part of the currency of what you do for a living, but for most residents, they're very intimidating, and they can be very expensive. So if we could just make it so that a resident can come in and file some paperwork and have some meaningful standards for staff, I think that'd be a great thing to do.
And at this point, do we also want to look at the provision B, removing the sunset clause? Is that something that we want to look at?
What again?
The sunset clause, it was going to expire on March 21st, 2019, which would basically repeal this whole ordinance.
I have a tendency to believe that it's 1 year, which basically everybody that got a license this year had chicks. They didn't have chickens. So we haven't heard any complaints at all about chicks roaming around. So I don't want to repeal any sunset clause at this point until we've got a couple of years with full-size chickens.
Well, does that sunset clause affect the bee issue as well, or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
With bees, the bees, I don't want to bring this up separately, but, if we're talking about sunset
We put the
clauses.
sunset clause in the B part, it was just the
Not-
chicken part.
okay.
And we've only had one B license so far.
Right. So maybe we should bring that down to a minimum lot size as well, so more people could have bees.
Wouldn't be a bad idea to look at in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can look at that.
Maybe we can extend that sunset provision a number of years to allow the chicks to mature and for us to build experience in town.
Yes.
I think that is, I would be happy with that.
So what should we change that to? 2022?
I think that would be within the province of the staff to recommend.
How long does it take a chicken to get full size and full voice? Yeah, okay, so I would say I would extend it another 2 years, just 2 years beyond what we're at,
3 years?
2021, 2020.
I'm hearing,
I'm not a big fan of making the lot size smaller, but I've learned long ago that you pick your battles, and I really don't have a
we've got,
heavy opinion one way or another on the chickens here, so.
we have at least 2 board members that seem to be supporting the smaller lot size of 6,000 square feet. And we have trustee Ranky, and we talked about a variation process. So we just need some direction. Maybe it's both.
Is that too small? But the problem with the smaller lot size is that your neighbors are closer. That's the only,
The setbacks.
the setbacks.
We have to move forward on this. I would be in agreement rather than have staff, put forth, demands or draft ordinances and whatnot. Maybe we could just do the 6,000.
Is anyone hard and fast against the smaller lot size?
No.
Setbacks are in place, and then you can draft some kind of a variance, done.
Thank you.
You want to do the variance and the smaller lot size?
Well-
To get clarification?
Would the variance pertain to if
What were
they
you
don't meet the
referring to?
setbacks?
No variance.
If you have the smaller lot size, it's unnecessary, right?
Right.
If you do the smaller lot size, would you need a variance? Because you're already at the minimum lot size.
No variant or exceptions on the setbacks and everything else.
It must be a single family.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think staff does need to look at the setbacks in the context of the 6,000 square foot lot. We paint ourselves into a corner, in which case you would need a variance process.
Right.
If the setback's 35 feet and
Yeah.
they only have 33 and a
And the
half.
size of the coop has to be a certain size, then you're
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
We do a 10-foot, it's a 10-foot the coop has to be 10 feet from any lot line. So in a 6,000 square foot lot, you should be able to achieve that if you put your coop in your, and it has to be in the rear yard. So I wouldn't get away from the 10-foot separation.
Okay.
And, you know, because in those 6,000 square foot lots with garages, we allow it to go down to 3 feet. And I wouldn't do that with the chickens. I'd keep them at the 10-foot setback and just go down to the smaller lot size and then extend the time frame for the sunset for 3 years.
There would need to be variation in a case like your neighbor, because she doesn't have anybody
Right.
behind her, so that 10-foot setback.
Well, she does have people flanking her, but that's fine.
the
I mean, I
rear,
think that
though.
makes sense. If the decision of the board is to reduce the size of the lots, then we can hold firm on the other requirements and,
Maybe we'll have
You know
4
me.
more next year.
right.
And would that be a bad thing? No.
I love watching it. You're like proud parents. It's cracking me up.
There you go.
Right.
I haven't, at what point does the board start getting eggs? Like, when we come to the board meeting? Okay. Yeah.
Plus, everybody just colored them on Sundays.
All right, we'll move on to our next item. You guys have enough direction?
I believe so, thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the southwest corner of West Lake Street and Route 59, the annexation and rezoning of this property. With that, Jim, want to give us a rundown? I think there might be some changes.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hopkins. This is the property that we brought to you some time ago at the committee level that is now subject of we've hired a broker to market it. Subsequent to that, we've gone through the process with the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission looked at the rezoning of this property to the B4, because they are currently both zoned ER, well, one's zoned ER1, the one's not in the village. So the yellow property is, we're subject to the annexation, and then upon annexation, it would be zoned ER1. Mr. Thomas is here tonight. He lives in the subdivision just to the west of the red parcel, and actually further west than that's on this map. And what we would like to do is to at least move on to the annexation of the property, which is this parcel, and at least get the annexation and both parcels in the village. And then when we have the development proposals for this site from the brokers, we'd bring those to you, and then that could determine which way we're going to go with the zoning. Right now, the development proposals may not take the entire parcels that we own there. So, and just showing the village's land use plan, this area years ago was planned for commercial development. Some of it is zoned commercial, some of it is zoned, still remains at the ER1 zoning. So it's kind of a mixed bag up there. Where Mr. Thomas lives, that's all zoned multifamily SR6, primarily characterized by townhomes. And that's kind of where our land use plan stands today. So if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them, but we'd like to move forward at least with the annexation of this property, which would require a public hearing and then an ordinance annexing, public hearing in front of the board on the annexation, and then an annexation ordinance approving of this.
Just annexing it may not require the public hearing. The actual public hearing is on an annexation agreement, and there isn't one with ourselves, nor is there a plan as to what the development would be. So the public hearing will be ultimately on whatever the zoning proposal is,
Once it's already been annexed.
once it's already been annexed.
Why didn't the village annex this property when we bought it?
Good question.
There's a good question, and for lack of my memory being clear, when we bought this property and we created the TIF district, the piece to the west of it, the red piece, was in danger, and that's probably a wrong term, and God will strike me dead, it was going to be a church. So we were worried that we would lose a parcel that was commercially zoned and developed, and so we bought it and then moved the church site further west.
The owner of this piece was not interested in selling or annexing at the time the TIF was created.
Correct.
And so it was only after that they came in. Now, that being said, why, since it was acquired by the village, did it not get annexed? I can't give you a good answer to that.
Does the developer own B4, Jim?
The development proposals that we have are on the red parcel, the B4 parcel.
No, the B4 below it. Does anyone own that?
Yes, and we're actually meeting with that person tomorrow.
Okay.
And they were the owners and developers of the townhome project to the west. They were Town and Country Homes at the time.
Okay. Well, I don't see any hesitation in annexing it, so that's really the only direction you're looking for right now, right?
Yes.
We'll send this to the village board for the
Anybody else have
annexation.
any issues with annexing that property?
Sure.
Well, it's not just the annexation, but it's also the rezoning. And I mean, and I understand, sir, what you're saying, and you're concerned about your neighborhood. I think however this property is developed is reasonable, however it's reasonably developed, whether it's commercial or residential, you're going to see the increase in traffic. There's going to be changes, and that's unfortunate. I would think that the rezoning makes sense. It's consistent with the area. It's our comp plan.
You're going to get that even with the 59 construction when they redo all that
Right.
on-off ramp stuff. You're going to see some increased traffic with that.
It's not to minimize it, but
Right. It's not,
it's
yeah.
always going to happen.
It's a downfall of Lake, or upfall and downfall of Lake Street. There's a lot of cars going up and down there.
But I think we need to be very sensitive that when we finally do get a developer, we get somebody who's going to pay attention to the traffic and the traffic flow. And
Agreed.
I'm assuming that the owner of the B4 property, that when you talk to them tomorrow, we'll just call it the B4 property, that you're going to talk about site access, probably to the south and the west.
The unfortunate thing about that B4 property is it only has access up through that Horizon Drive. They don't, even though they touch 59, there's no access to 59 through what they own on 59's frontage.
And there's no way IDOT's going to give them a curb cut on 50.
Not that close.
Not that close.
Well,
I
maybe
would
we
agree
could
with
have
that.
some coordinated access through the two parcels going to the north to Lake Street.
They would need to get some land assembly with some of the property owners to the south to get access on the 59.
No, I'm saying go north, take the B4 property. When you talk to them, tell them that there might be a way that we can have shared access going to the north through the yellow and red properties.
That's the only way they can get it, right?
I should say we had to go out through Horizon.
Well, they touch Horizon, so they can access that way too. But you're right, they would have to go through yellow or the red property.
We've made that work before.
Yes, we have.
How long cul-de-sac would that be?
I don't know. Well, I don't know.
Take a wild guess. I'm just thinking of who's going to give you trouble on a plan commission regarding the length of the cul-de-sac.
Yeah,
That's
I
okay. Don't
could
answer
name
the
a few.
question. Don't answer the question.
All right, so we'll move this on to the village board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That's all we have.
That,
under
I'll entertain a
zoning.
motion to adjourn. Thank you, trustee
So
Hopkins.
moved.
Moved by trustee Daney. Seconded by trustee Carbonaro. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Cameron.
Yes.
Carbonaro.
Yes.
Daney.
Yes.
Gabrenya.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Ranky.
Yes.